thousands of people, dead, shot in the streets. Not soldiers, not criminals, ordinary men and women who simply said, "We don't want this government anymore." And the government said, "We don't care." Ask yourself one question: why could they do that? And more importantly, could it ever happen where you live? In 1979, Iran's people overthrew a corrupt Shah. They wanted freedom, they wanted democracy, they wanted a future their children could live in without fear. What they got was one of the most repressive regimes on earth, a supreme leader with absolute power, religious police patrolling the streets, women told how to dress, where to go, who to be, and anyone who pushed back disappeared. In 2009, Iranians protested a stolen election. Hundreds were killed, thousands jailed. The world watched and did nothing. In 2019, the government cut the internet for 5 days and shot at least 1,500 protesters in the dark. No cameras, no witnesses, no accountability. They knew exactly what they were doing. Darkness was the weapon. In 2022, a 22-year-old woman named Mahsa Amini died in police custody for wearing her hijab slightly wrong. The country erupted. Women burned their headscarves in the streets. Young men stood beside them. Schoolgirls chanted against the regime. The regime's response? Snipers on rooftops, execution sentences, children shot through the eyes with metal pellets. And the world posted a hashtag and moved on. How is this still possible in 2026? Simple. The people had no way to fight back. In Iran, civilian gun ownership is nearly impossible. The state controls all weapons. The Revolutionary Guard, a private army loyal to the supreme leader, not the people, holds absolute firepower. Think about what that means in practice. When the government decides you are the enemy, you have two choices: submit or die. There is no third option. You cannot defend yourself. You cannot defend your family. You cannot defend your neighbor. You show up to a protest with a handmade sign. They show up with assault rifles, armored vehicles, and a list of names. You are entirely dependent on the mercy of people who have already shown they have none. This is not a war between two armies. This is not even a fair fight. This is a fully armed government against completely unarmed civilians. That is not a protest. That is a massacre. And they know it. That is why they disarmed the people first. America's founders understood this perfectly. They had just fought a tyrannical government themselves. They bled for it. They buried friends for it. They knew, from direct personal experience, that power corrupts, always, eventually, without exception. So they wrote the Second Amendment. And here is what most people get wrong about it. It was never about hunting. It was never about home burglary. Those are talking points invented 200 years later to make it sound small, to make it sound outdated. James Madison wrote that Americans had, quote, the advantage of being armed, unlike citizens of other nations whose governments were afraid to trust the people with arms. Afraid. That word is everything. A government that fears its own citizens cannot become a dictatorship because the cost is too high. Thomas Jefferson said, "When governments fear the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny." Read that again, slowly, because it is the entire political philosophy of the American Republic in 2 sentences. Today, American civilians own over 400 million firearms, more guns than people. No government, no matter how corrupt, how radical, how power-hungry, can look at those numbers and seriously consider what Iran does every decade. The math protects the freedom. That is the entire point. It always was. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable. Because this is not just about Iran. This is a pattern. A repeating, documented, undeniable pattern that is played out across the 20th century and into the 21st. Iran disarms civilians, regime kills protesters freely. Venezuela, Chavez confiscated civilian guns in 2012. Full dictatorship followed within years. North Korea, zero civilian weapons, most totalitarian state on earth. 3 generations of a family dynasty ruling by starvation and fear. Nazi Germany, one of Hitler's first acts was civilian disarmament. 1938, 1 year later, the Holocaust began. Soviet Union, Stalin disarmed the peasantry, then collectivized their land, then starved millions who resisted. Every single time. Disarm the people first. Control them second. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is a history lesson, and it has been taught over and over and over again in blood. And now look at what mainstream media calls common sense gun reform. They never frame it honestly. They never say, we are removing your last protection against government tyranny. They never say, we are taking the one tool that makes a government hesitate. They say, we just want to keep children safe. And nobody wants to argue against keeping children safe. That is the trap. That is the design of the argument. That framing is not accidental. That is narrative control at its most sophisticated. That is the fake news playbook, applied to the most dangerous possible topic. They use your compassion as a weapon against your freedom. They take the most emotionally charged image they can find, and they attach it to a policy that has nothing to do with solving that problem, and everything to do with concentrating power. Because if people understood that gun control is fundamentally about power, not safety, the conversation would change overnight. If people connected the dots between disarmament and dictatorship, the way history so clearly does, no politician pushing gun confiscation would survive the next election. So they make sure you never connect those dots. That is their job, and it is working. The people of Iran are not weaker than you. They are not less brave. They are not less intelligent. They burned their headscarves knowing they could be shot. They marched knowing snipers were watching. They faced armored vehicles with nothing but their bodies and their voices. That is extraordinary courage, and it was not enough, because courage without capability is just sacrifice. And the regime was perfectly happy to let them sacrifice themselves, knowing nothing would change. The only difference between them and a free citizen is one thing: a gun. In the hand of someone willing to use it, changes everything a government calculates. Suddenly, the cost of oppression becomes real. Suddenly, the body count runs both directions. Suddenly, a government has to ask, is this worth it? That question, that one question, is the entire foundation of a free society. The Second Amendment is not a relic. It is not about deer hunting. It is not about compensating for insecurity. It is not a Republican talking point. It is the single line between a free republic and what you just watched happen in Iran. And the moment that line disappears, the moment you hand over the last tool that makes governments afraid, you had better hope the people in power are kind. Share this video. Talk about it. Because this is exactly the story they don't want told. Not because it's extreme, but because it's true. And the truth on this particular topic is the most dangerous thing in the world to the people who want your compliance. Stay armed, stay informed, stay free.